Hi, welcome to our session on drone and journalism. My name is Valérie Bélair-Gagnon, and I'm Executive Director of the Yale Information Society project. There has been many conversation about the legal, ethical, normative implication of drone journalism that we have discussed at the Yale Information Society project and the Tao Center at Columbia University. Today we feel that a confluence of regulatory challenges and mainstream media adoption of the uses of drone have led to a new stage in the progress of drone journalism, one that would benefit from a taking stock conversation. So we've assembled leading voices on the debate. Some of the questions that we're particularly interested in are, how did the technology that was generally illegal become mainstream into journalistic use? How did journalists experiment with the technology outside of their professional capacity? And how has this work been integrated into the newsrooms? How has the role of drone industry in the US impacted journalistic use? What additional skill sets were needed that weren't already present in the newsroom? And to what extent did the regulation or legal oversight in other countries allow US-based media to experiment overseas? In this session, panelists will answer questions about the emerging legal and regulatory framework governing drone journalism, both domestically and internationally, as well as discuss where the technology is headed and how it can be leveraged for your journalism. Matt Waite, Professor of Practice at the College of Journalism and Mass Communication, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, will talk about what journalists are facing in the US, including this summer getting a pilot license to comply with the Section 333 exemption requirements. And what can we expect about the notice of proposed rulemaking and after? Dickens Olewe, project lead Africa Skycam, will show some of the projects they have been producing and give a status of the regulation for a few African countries. Ben Kramer, journalist technologist, BuzzFeed Open Lab, Drone Journalism Lab, and African Skycam, will show examples of his fieldwork and projects. He will explore the challenges of drone journalism fieldwork and talk about the equipment that he travels with. This session will be followed by a Q&A, where we hope to discuss how we can leverage drones in journalism, and if you already use the technology, how it has been used. Thank you.
So the way we wanted to sort of structure this is I am here to crush your dreams, and Ben and Dickens will restore them somewhat. And we hope you leave here with at least a semi-optimistic feeling when you leave. Right now, at this very moment in the United States, the situation around drones and their use, particularly for journalism, is, how do I put this delicately? Actually, I just got a text that my kids are watching this, so I can't use the language that I would like to. If you know me, you know what words are coming. It's not a good thing. Right now, if you want to use a drone for journalism, you are considered a commercial operator. The FAA essentially has three different users. They are hobbyists, which are mostly the people you see out flying them right now. People who are just doing it for fun. They bought one. They're not making money. They're not doing anything with it other than flying it for just the sheer joy of it. And let's be honest, it's fun. It's a lot of fun to do. There are government users, which has its own set of fun and joy. They primarily are law enforcement, search and rescue, aeronautics researchers, weirdly, and those kinds of things. Education, very explicitly not a government function under the FAA's guidelines. We found out the hard way. The third group is commercial users, and that is anybody who is flying in furtherance of a business. That is the regulatory term of art, in furtherance of a business. So if you're on the clock and somebody asks you to fly a thing, you are a commercial user. Journalists have have been dealt a particular bad hand here because our default position is to publish. Our default position is to publish and draw attention to it and to get the widest possible audience. The FAA is looking for it. this is something else we found out the hard way. We did our first story, Ben was there, in 2012. We put it on YouTube. It was the first story that we had done as a lab, and there was a lot of attention around the drone journalism lab. I think, was it 30 different news organizations from around the world ended up writing about that shortly afterwards in a bunch of different languages. And one of them happened to be the Kansas City Star. And 8 months later, we got a letter from the Kansas City office of the FAA saying, knock it off. Cease and desist. So there's part of me that freaked out, like very nearly wet my pants, because I was thinking, what is the weather like in Gitmo this time of year? The other part of me was like, well, how did they find out about it? And then I remembered the Kansas City Star had written about it, and I figured the Kansas City Star must have ended up on the break room table at the FAA office, and I'm like, hey, somebody's reading the paper, all right. There's an optimistic view here. We called them up and said, what do we got to do? And they said, well, you're a state university, so you're a government user. Go get a government permit. Fine. We started doing the paperwork for that. And while we were doing that, while we were in the middle of the process, the FAA changed the rules and decided that education was not a government function anymore. Don't ask. I don't even want to go into it. So that meant we had to become a commercial operator. To do journalism with a drone, you have to become a commercial operator. Now, the commercial rules are actually fairly straightforward. A Section 333 exemption is what it's called. If you Google that, you will find the list of every 333 exemption on the FAA's website. You can read all of the approved 333 exemptions. There's about 1,658 as of yesterday. Really, to get one, you pretty much need to open one up, change some words, resubmit it. That's literally it. A 333 exemption is just a list of federal aviation regulations you don't have to comply with because you're flying one of these and not a Cessna. You do not need an airworthiness certificate for this. You especially do not have to keep that airworthiness certificate in the cockpit next to you. Because where would you put it? There are a whole bunch of rules like that essentially you just have to say, I can't comply with this because I'm flying a 3-pound hunk of plastic on the ground. There's about 15 of them. It's fairly straightforward. The FAA will then review that. It will take several months, and they'll kick it back to you, and they'll give you a set of restrictions. The basic aerial photography restrictions that go with a 333 exemption are, has to be within your line of sight, can't go above 500 feet. If you are flying no more than 200 feet above the ground and you are in Class G airspace, you're in basically wide open territory, you're not in a city where there's an airport nearby, the FAA doesn't even want to know. They just go do it. We don't care. If you're in restricted airspace, you have to file what's called a notice to airmen, and you have to call the tower where you're going to be near, and they have to know at least 24 hours in advance. So house burning down a mile away from the airport, you can get the smoldering ruins on the next day. Breaking news is going to be very, very hard. The one that trips everybody up, and if you're a reporter in the room and you're looking for a story idea, look at the 333 operators in your city and find out how many of them are licensed manned aircraft pilots. The FAA, interpreting a statute from Congress, says that in order to fly a drone as a commercial operator, you have to be a licensed pilot. There are no drone licenses at the FAA right now, which means you have to be a manned aircraft pilot in order to fly a drone on the ground. So if the College of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Nebraska, near the Harvard of the Plains, was going to actually go outside and use the drones that we bought to do journalism, somebody had to be a licensed pilot. And since none of my students were licensed pilots and they graduate and move on, and I'm still mad, Ben, why did you do that to me? Why did you have to graduate? That's what I did. Started May 21st. 2 weeks ago, I got this little piece of paper that says, if there's any breaking needs for a light sport aircraft, I'm your man. Let's go do it. I originally started out with the intent of getting this license just so I could fly drones, but it is so much fun flying an airplane. I am so bored driving my car now. It is just, it's terrible. So I found something that I love doing, and I had no idea that I loved it, but I do. God help me, I do. The issue that a lot of people ask me about is, did learning to fly an airplane teach you anything about flying a drone on the ground? And the answer is no, not a bit. The only thing that I would say helped me learning how to fly an airplane so that I could fly a drone, that I learned in the airplane, let me specify this, that I learned in the airplane, is that it is really, really hard to see things when you are flying an airplane. Other airplanes are really hard to see, and they're fairly big. Now, Lincoln, Nebraska has an air guard base, and they fly giant tanker planes. They're easy. You can see them coming. The Air Force Base up in Omaha flies these converted 747s. You can't miss them. Other airplanes like Cessnas, twin-engine planes, things like that, air traffic control will come on and say, you've got a plane 3 miles in front of you coming right at you. You need to either deviate course or alert us when you have it in sight. And you'll look out there, and you're like, I am minutes away from a fiery death, and I can't see anything. Like it's, I'm going to just turn this way and take their word for it. A little drone like this thing, you'll see it when it's hitting the side of your airplane. That'll be the first time you'll see it. Like when it's in the propellers, oh, there it is. Birds. I'm pretty sure the first 10 hours I flew in a plane, I didn't see a single bird. And my flight instructor was going, oh, wow, the big bird just went by. Where? You're so focused on other things, your eyes are darting around, you don't see. So I get now why pilots are really freaked out by this, because these devices are out there. I still think a plane, one of these striking a plane, the plane will land fine. Geese are bigger than those. Geese strike planes. Flocks of geese strike planes. They still land. But I get it. I totally understand it. That's the state in the US. If you want to be a drone user in the US, you must be a licensed manned aircraft pilot for about the next 1.5 to 2 years. In February, the FAA proposed a set of rules. If you'd have told me 2 years ago I would know this much about federal rulemaking, I would have said you're crazy, but suddenly I know really a lot about it, and I don't want this information. In February, the FAA proposed a set of rules. The first step in any federal rulemaking process is called a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, shortened to NPRM. The FAA's NPRM laid out a framework of rules that they're going to implement at some point. The NPRM does away with the pilot's license requirement. Top line, big deal. That's number one thing. You don't have to be a licensed manned aircraft pilot. You will have to take a test. You'll have to take a knowledge test. That knowledge test will basically be, how do you read one of these? This is a sectional chart. This is airspace rules for everywhere in central Nebraska and parts of Iowa and South Dakota. Being able to read one of these will be extremely important, and you'll have to take a test about it at some point. It'll be a 40-question multiple choice test. Give me about 8 hours of your time, and I'll get you through it. It won't be that hard. Cost you about $150, but once you pass it, you're good. There'll be a set of rules. You can only fly during the day. Right now, day has very specific meaning. If you're a photographer and you know the golden hour, guess what? You don't get to fly in the golden hour. There are a lot of people that are really mad about that, so we're hoping that'll change. You have to be within your visual line of sight. That means no FPV flying. No using a screen and just letting it go and using what's coming through the camera to fly. You've got to have it within your sight. You have to have a spotter watching it. The FAA says you can't fly over people, but they won't say what that means. Do they mean literally the azimuthal point above somebody's head? Okay, I sort of get that. But right now, under the 333 guidelines, you can't be within 500 feet of the nearest person not involved in the flight. So again, flying in a city doing breaking news, gonna be really hard for a little while. I live in Nebraska, that's not a problem. 500 feet with no people, no problem. We got that. They haven't said what the rules will be with regard to this when this notice of proposed rulemaking. When will these rules go into place? This is the subject of active gambling. The optimistic money is looking at late 2016. A deputy administrator for the FAA said that they'll have their part of this done by summer of 2016. There's a bunch of interagency review that has to go on after that, and the executive branch has to get involved. There are people that think the Obama administration wants to have this done by the time they leave office, so December of 2016. There are people who have been watching the FAA for much longer who think more like summer of 2017 is probably more of a realistic time. When that happens, I predict every newsroom is going to have one of these. A lot of people are going to use them. A lot of people are going to overuse them, and kind of rising drone shots are going to be so cliched, you're going to be sick of them. But that's sort of the history of technology use in news particularly. We find a new shiny thing, we overuse it, it swings back, and when it swings back, that'll be somewhere around where we're actually going to use them. So if you're wanting to fly in your city here in the US, be patient. Either knuckle down for a lot of work, come join me in the skies, it's fun, but it's expensive and it's a lot of work. It cost me about $7,000 to get that pilot's license. It probably more in other places, probably less in some others, so, but it's not cheap. So be patient or put in a lot of work for about a year head start. But now that I've crushed your dreams, I'll let Ben and Dickens build them back up with actual cool stuff.
Should I pull up Dickens?
No.
Okay. So Dickens is in the UK, so we're going to pull him in now.
Yeah, Ben, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. Okay, so you are up, Dickens.
Hi there. Thanks, Matt. I'll try and paint a rosy picture as I can about the future of drones. All right, great. So African Skycam. I'm up. Okay, great. So 2012,
You all right, Dickens?
yeah, I think there's some sort of delay. Okay. Ben, hello?
Yeah. Yeah, we're here. We're here. I just turned off my
Okay.
video.
Okay, I'll just go for it and then, anyway. So 2012, the African News Innovation Challenge opened up. And this was a competition inviting African journalists to basically, come up with digital solutions to address the challenges that African journalists were facing when covering stories. And then at that point, I pitched using drones for news gathering. And around about the same time, we had floods in Kenya. And pretty much this was what was happening. This was a typical way how pretty much Kenyan journalists were covering floods. They would go into rural areas especially and hire local fishermen. And they'll row about trying to get as close as possible to the scale of the disaster. So
And Dickens Louis, ladies and gentlemen. I think you might have jump in here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think I'll just abandon my presentation here because it's not going well. So basically, we went out there and we've covered a number of stories. Ben will talk about this and he has some really great examples which he will show. So we've covered floods, we've covered a political rally.
No? Okay. Dickens?
Yeah.
Keep going? If we keep having difficulties, if it cuts out again, we're going to jump to me. Okay, we're going to have to drop you because we keep pausing.
Okay, just go for it, Ben. I'll just follow the live stream.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. So, yeah, I'm Ben Kramer, journalism technologist working with BuzzFeed currently in San Francisco. I'm part of the Open Lab, which is a new fellowship that they're offering, which is focused on bringing in basically media innovators, people who want to experiment with hardware and software and to develop new storytelling tools. So my focus is on drones and open source sensors, so more of a hardware focus. And I'm the beta fellow, so things are just getting started there. As Matt mentioned, I am connected with the Drone Journalism Lab and have been since the very beginning. I was there when we got our letter, and basically from that point on, I started going abroad to do work. So I've spent a lot of time in India in the past couple of years, doing a little bit of work with the Times of India, covering a soccer match where I provided content, and then they included me in their news coverage, me flying the drone. But doing work like this. And then also going to Kenya, working with Dickens on his African Skycam project. We've done a lot of collaborations through that, here's some of the projects, organizations that I've worked with, we've worked with. As you can see, mostly abroad, African Wildlife Foundation in Africa, Big Life Foundation, doing conservation sort of PR work, but also doing conservation wildlife stories for CCTV Africa, Times of India, Magical Kenya, doing work with the Kenya Tourism Board, did a project with Vice in Nairobi as well. Okay, so here's kind of some clips of work over the years. So in India, here's some of the football match from above. Did a video piece 4 Times of India about this tournament. Rally race in Kenya. Basically trying out different ways of using a drone in different contexts. So yeah, a lot of wildlife videography. This here was a broadcast piece for CCTV News out of Nairobi. So I was kind of the aerial cameraman. And then we had shots on the ground too, of course. It was a news package. Most recently, back in August, I traveled around. This is Victoria Falls. So doing more work in Africa, going places which are difficult to go otherwise without a helicopter, and even places where you couldn't go with a helicopter. So this was doing more PR work for a safari group and working with the conservancies along the way. So this here is in Serengeti during the Great Migration, so wildebeest herds.
Y'all gotta know, Ben posts about like one thing a month on Facebook, and it's like this. So you're like, Oh, well, that's where he is.
And so I've also been doing a fair amount of work with archaeologists. So when I think of drones and storytelling, I don't just think of kind of journalism in the most straightforward sense. I think of how can we use drones in a very broad storytelling fashion. So working with, like I said, archaeologists, videographers, journalists, of course. But really, I see the drone as a tool that can tell a lot of different kinds of stories in a lot of different contexts. So in Turkey here, this dig site on the southern coast had been using methods like this, using fire trucks to get a man up in the air to take photos of the sites that they had been excavating. And it was actually pretty dangerous. They had, previously, before the fire truck boom, they were using a sort of forklift front-end loader rig with a man hanging down by chains, taking photos over some of these sites so that they could get that sort of top-down aerial perspective. And the man on the boom here, he actually fell from about 3 stories when the chains kind of slipped. So then they went to the fire truck, and then they realized this is ridiculous. Let's bring in the drone. Because they wanted photos like this, which were impossible even with the fire truck. And they couldn't afford an airplane. You know, to fly me over to Turkey and to take care of me for a week, it cost less to do that than to hire a plane, which wouldn't even be able to get photos like this, which are taken from about 150, 200 feet maybe. So really, the drone helped them a lot. Now, also did 3D work for them, doing 3D reconstructions of the sites that they've been excavating. So using a drone to recreate a space. And now I'm going to jump out and show this 3D model. Okay, so when it comes to storytelling, doing 3D work really adds a new dimension, literally, to a story because it allows you to get a sense of space, which you cannot get from a 2-dimensional video, a 2-dimensional photograph. And so this here is a 3D model of that mosaic. I just dropped it in on my website using Sketchfab, which is kind of like the YouTube for 3D models. And with this, we can now look around and fly around the mosaic site. And so this was just made using this guy here, a DJI Phantom with a bottle cap underneath it. Bottle cap mount with an L bracket. So it kind of hacked together a solution, but it worked, and it made this. So really, it's all in the post-processing after the field work where this comes out. Because I just took still photographs, and in software was able to process a 3D model of this space. Okay, so another project in Nairobi. After working with those archaeologists, this was a little over a year ago, went back to Nairobi to do another story for African Skycam about this giant landfill called the Bandura Dump. And it was sort of a 2-part project. The first being, we're going to fly a camera and shoot aerial video of this space. And it's controversial because it's overflowing, the dump is. It supports a slum, basically. So there's a large population of people that live off of the trash by picking through it and selling what they find. So the government is in a difficult spot because if they relocate the dump, then a lot of people will no longer be able to support themselves the way that they have been. But at the same time, it's a big health problem. Here's an aerial shot. This is actually a composite image made of 500 photos taken by the same drone that made that mosaic model. And of course, I made a model of the dump as well. So here we have the Nairobi Bandura Dump. Welcome to the dump, everybody. So we can fly around. We can look over here. I've dropped in annotations. So here we have a school that borders the landfill. You can see the wall as it traces along the border. Over here, these structures are housing. People live in the dump. We can fly over here. We have another school. And then we have the Nairobi River, which flows right into downtown Nairobi, past the Bandura Dump. So again, you saw a few video clips from the drone, but now we have an entirely different way of experiencing the space of the landfill. And the space in this story, the space of the landfill, is very important to the story that we were trying to tell. So again, this is all done with a DJI Phantom 2, a Canon SX260 camera, and a bottle cap and an L bracket. And I've since moved on, but here it is up close.
That's sitting in my office right now, by the way.
Yeah. So now I'm using a Phantom 3. I really like using these off-the-shelf drones. This here was at the archaeological dig in Turkey just about 6 weeks ago. So wouldn't a bigger, more professional drone with a bigger camera be better? Not necessarily. I really like working with these off-the-shelf Phantoms, especially because they're so small, they're easy to travel with. I can fly off of very small places, like off the back of a Land Rover, off of the back of a Land Cruiser. So it makes it very easy to just kind of pull it out of its bag, set it down, and I'm up in the air. So they can be operated autonomously or manually. They only cost about $2,000, and they fit in a nice hard-shell backpack. So I can throw it into a bush plane, and into a canoe, and I know it'll be okay. And it's easy for one person to work with, because I always work alone, though I'm always collaborating with somebody else. But I'm always the drone guy, so I have to be able to manage everything that I have. And also the Phantoms, they look friendly. This is useful when going through customs, when flying in public areas where people have probably never seen a drone before. So having a drone with all the wires enclosed and just having this kind of nice, neat white shell, I think really, it helps smooth the operations a bit and helps me get around with the equipment. And these Phantoms are really reliable. I have no connection to DJI. I just like their products, because they work. They're simple, and they've done really good things for me. So moving in a slightly different direction, a couple days ago, Facebook announced that 360-degree videos were now compatible with news feeds. YouTube, about 6 months ago, started allowing people to upload 360 video content. So this is on the way to VR. And traditionally, VR 360 immersive content has been shot using 6 GoPros. But you can't fly 6 GoPros on a DJI Phantom. And 6 GoPros, that'll run you about $3,000. So I thought, well, could we make a VR rig with just 2 GoPros? And that's what we've done. This here, and in the photo, is a Phantom with 2 GoPros. They are back-to-back, and they each have aftermarket lenses. So together, they shoot a 360-degree video sphere, 360 degrees of video. And you can come up and look at it afterwards, but there's a 3D printed mount for the 2 cameras, and that's about it. And real quick, so this is a video. Let's see if I can. Yeah. So this here I shot in the BuzzFeed Open Lab. So as you can see, the lab is new. We don't have a lot of equipment yet. Here I am walking it around. But yeah, you get the idea. We have a few tools, 1 drone, and me so far. Now, with the 360 content, that's a pretty boring way to interact with it, I think. What I wanted to show was, if you have a mobile device, you can load up your YouTube app and watch the video and you can actually just move your tablet around, move your phone, and you can look around the space. So that's where this technology gets interesting. It's actually more for mobile devices than it is for laptops, because you're just clicking and dragging, and that's not so much fun. So, and again, the price difference is enormous. For about $1,500, you can have a drone-based 360-degree video rig that shoots comparable video to what you would do with 6 GoPros and a bigger drone like the Inspire, but for thousands less. And then two, just kind of for comparison, the GoPro Odyssey, which is 16 GoPros and weighs 15 pounds, costs $15,000. And even with that, the quality, while it is better, it is not, to me, worth that much more. It's not worth 10 times the price of what I'm doing. And plus, if you look at the bottom of the screen here on the right, there's this kind of fuzzy circle. And that's because the Odyssey doesn't capture that part of the frame. So you don't even get that sort of, that lower section of the video. Now, I've been flying balloons a little bit. This is kind of a gag, but because we can't fly drones in the US, everything that I just showed, aside from flying in the BuzzFeed Open Lab, was done overseas. So a balloon rig, we can fly balloons with cameras and do journalism work in the US, right?
Kites work pretty well, too.
Yeah, but you need wind, and it could careen into the ground. Of course, I had a balloon pop once, so you got to be careful with this, too. But it does work. And here's a shot. I mean, basically, I had a GoPro drone gimbal underneath my balloon, so I could control it and look around. And I took some photos. So, yeah, thanks.
I have a few questions, but I think maybe we can go through the Q&A since we have a little bit of time.
Okay.
But maybe I'll start with one question. So your stories of drones was really bleak in the United States. Mm-hmm. But I know that from previous conversations that we've talked about, journalists experimenting with drones in the United States and not necessarily going abroad. Can you give a few examples of success stories and maybe not necessarily success stories, but maybe way in which news organization or local news have used drones, even though there are legal challenges?
Sure. There are actually a number of news organizations. There are a handful of production companies, a handful of freelance companies that have actually gone ahead and gotten 333 exemptions. And you're starting to see news organizations starting to contract with them, that it's actually sort of a more simple route right now. It's just to hire somebody else. There was he's a cameraman in Chicago who got a 333 exemption. He worked with a local television station there, and they did a live broadcast from, I think it was a DJI Inspire. It was the opening of a long jogging trail. It wasn't, it wasn't huge news, but they were in Chicago, which is, one of the busiest airspaces in the world, and they were just kind of flying over the trail live on the 6 o'clock news. Television actually has a pretty substantial advantage over all other news organizations because many of them still employ pilots. The larger markets still have their news helicopters, and so they already have a licensed pilot on staff. It's just a matter of filling out some paperwork and going down to, or going to Amazon and buying one. There was a station, I think, in New Mexico that just announced the other day that they got one, and they have a photo on their website of a DJI Inspire in the foreground and their actual, $4 million TV news helicopter in the background. So that's sort of the direction that it's going in, and you're starting to see more and more things. The first 6 companies to get 333 exemptions were all movie companies, and television production companies have been getting them all over the place. So if you watch the Discovery Channel for about 10 minutes and you've got some, Yukon Gold, something, in Canada or in Alaska, and you see this shot where they're slowly rising above the scene of whatever they were just doing, that wasn't shot with a helicopter, and nobody has a 250-foot long boom. So if you watch carefully, you'll see stuff going on all over the place. Some of it's legal, a lot of it's not. But there are positive directions. On the part of news organizations, they're starting to get into this 333 process and really starting to move that forward.
Can you clarify the news organization's role with the contractor now. Previously at a different O&A, you had spoken that people who were commercial pilots, that when the news organization hired them, that was not legal because it extended.
Yeah. So he's talking about a time before kind of the 333 process came along, and I talked about this before, where hobbyists or people who owned them and were saying, you know, or who were just going out and doing it and selling the video and just not caring if the FAA found them or not. I worried about liability, that if a news organization was contracting with somebody who was knowingly violating the law and something terrible happened, what would happen to the news organization? And I sort of cautioned against that. Now it's much more straightforward. You have somebody who has a piece of paper from the regulatory agency saying they can do this. You now have a contractual relationship where you expect them to follow the rules, and you know, there's an indemnification section in there, and there is aviation insurance now. If you are a news organization and you are looking to employ somebody on a 333 exemption, you should get their pilot certificate number so you know that they are a certificated pilot. You should find out what insurance they have. Your lawyers should be very careful about making sure that that insurance policy covers you in the case of something really terrible happening. And it's a much more sane and rational process now. It's much more straightforward. It's much more stuff we're used to.
What about after the fact? So they shot a video and they came to you, I have a video.
So that's where it gets really weird. The FAA, back a little while ago, published a memo that said that the FAA will not go after news organizations if they publish drone video, period, full stop. That is basically an acknowledgement that the First Amendment exists and prior restraint is bad. So if a news organization publishes a drone video, they're not going to go after the news organization. The FAA's jurisdiction is over the operator, over the pilot. They can go after them. For individuals, if they want to, if a hobbyist is out flying for fun and news happens to occur nearby and they get video of it, they can actually sell it to you and make money off of it, and it's okay so long as they didn't go out of their way to get it. So if they're at a park and there's a car accident and they get video, it's fine. If they get in the car and drive to the car accident and get video of it, now they're a commercial operator and they're going to get in trouble. It is just a barrel of laughs every day with new stuff. But if you go to dronejournalismlab.org, there's a post on there that's probably about 2 or 3 down now. The headline is "All in the Game, Yo," and it's it's a line from The Wire. I'm a journalist. What do you want? In there is a link to the FAA's legal interpretation about media, and it will go in fairly specific detail about this, where it actually spells this out. It actually says if the hobbyist just happens to get news, they can sell it. If they go out of their way, they're actually committing, they're breaking the rules.
Need you to help me figure one out. My university bought a drone before all these silly regulations came out.
Yes.
And now it's looking really cool on my shelf in my office.
Mine too.
Yeah, so we have a cage in which we can fly it.
Yes.
Is there any other time when I can actually fly that thing outside? Could I take it home on the weekend, not for professional purposes, and fly it in the park for yucks? So one of the great lines from the show Mythbusters is that the difference between science and screwing around is writing stuff down. My understanding is that under the FAA, if you're off the clock, it's fine. On a Saturday in a park, you're good. The moment you take that to the office, now it's crossed a line. So go fly, have fun, don't write anything down, and you're good. Where it gets tricky is, does your university have aviation insurance? Probably not. Mine now does, for both drones that we own and drones that we don't own that might be crashed on campus. So that, I cannot tell you how many universities have called me up and said, hey, we bought 3 drones and we're putting them in the checkout room for students. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. None of them have had insurance. So since you are technically flying a university-owned aircraft, if you crash it into somebody, bad things beyond the crash are going to occur, involving lawyers and probably the termination of your contract.
So keep it on the shelf.
I'm not saying keep it on the shelf. I'm saying do your due diligence. You need to find out. You need to find your university's risk management officer and make friends with them. They're wonderful people.
I don't know how far you're able to go into the government use, but I don't work for a journalism agency. I work for a municipality.
Okay.
And so, where's my loophole? How can I use my drone? Because we bought one, and the gimbal finally arrived, and it's sitting on my desk.
What do you do for the municipality?
I'm in the communications department.
There is no loophole.
Do I need to switch to the police department?
Yes. If you happen to go search for a missing child in a creek, you're okay. If you then turn around and use that video for promotion of the city, it's probably fine. But the FAA has a listing of core government functions. Communication, education, things like that are very explicitly not on it. That too is listed in that same blog post on dronejournalismlab.org. The waivers of certificate of authorization is what you want from the government if you're a government user. Prior to about 1.5 years ago, they would just pretty much give those away. And they released you from a ton of stuff. They were restrictive in some ways, and they were really permissive in others. The FAA then realized they were giving them away to everybody, and that wasn't what they were originally intended for. They were intended for people doing largely aeronautics research or very specific and important government things that they didn't want FAA regulations to stand in the way of. And things like PR and journalism schools and things like that were not on that list of things that got the get out of jail free card. So I'm sorry to tell you, but there's no loophole for you. I mean, the weird thing about the whole waiver certificate of authorization that really bothered me in the first place was if you were a state university, you could get one. If you were a private university, you were screwed. So it was arbitrary to begin with, and now it's even more arbitrary, really, but it's really, really narrowly defined. So they've been trying to push people into this 333 process for some time.
Just for some clarification, when you say a pilot's license, do you mean a commercial pilot's license or a private pilot's license?
You can actually get a sport light license. So mine is for a sport light aircraft, which has a 100 horsepower engine and a 1,320 pound maximum takeoff weight. It is the least American airplane in existence because I'm nobody's middle linebacker here. I would go about $1.75. My flight instructor is a bit of a fitness nut. She's about 135 pounds, and between the two of us, we were 10 pounds under maximum takeoff weight with full fuel. So if either one of us knocked down a box of Krispy Kremes during the summer, we're gonna have to cut fuel out of the airplane to get off the ground. So, and actually, when I took my final test, the FAA the flight inspector was a 165 pound guy. We had to cut 6 gallons of fuel out of the plane in order to take off. So, you can get the minimum level of pilot's license that's available to you. You don't have to go to a full private. You can get a sport light, but finding a flight school that offers a sport light is more difficult than you might think. Very few actually do. If you're in Florida, Texas, California, places like that with Arizona with crap tons of retirees, that's what largely the sport light license is aimed at because the medical restrictions are way down. So they give them to old pilots who can't qualify for a private anymore.
We are going to play a 1-minute video to end on a positive note
Hey.
from Dickens. And I think the tech team is going to put that up right now.
The first time I saw aerial images from a drone, I knew they would change storytelling forever. That is why, in 2012, I founded African Skycam. We use drones to cover stories from angles that previously were possible only from costly news helicopters. From vast crowds at a political rally, park rangers training during an anti-poaching exercise in Tanzania, and recently we produced a 3D model of a massive dump site in Nairobi using photographs taken by a camera attached to a drone. We are excited about other potential applications. However, our work is threatened. A growing number of African countries such as Kenya, Uganda, and Morocco have banned civilians from operating drones. I recently organized a conference in Silicon Valley that brought together drone manufacturers, lawmakers, journalists, and academics to discuss the future of drones. I intend to bring this conversation to Africa.
All right.
Yeah, so I think we're at time.
We're done.
Yes.
Thank you all for coming.